Previously on Detour Hotel.
Can you tell us what he was looking at when he died? Fleet asked. It's not stored here. It's on the cloud and it's encrypted. It'll take a little while to figure out what it was. It's not impossible, though, Mike told him. Why are you good to me? He asked. She glumly disagreed. I'm not good to you. I'm using you, she said. Chapter 23. It took Kevin 5 flicks to get the orange plastic lighter to cooperate. Eventually, a small, quivering teardrop of flame bloomed under his cupped hand. He smiled at the tip of the cigarette as he drew in the first inhales of smoke. He leaned back against the cinder block of Constellation and exhaled. He closed one eye and spotted a passing jet. Okay, what about that one? He asked. Wren squinted her eyes against the vermilion glow of the sunset and hunted for the jet. The Southwest plane? Yup. He flicked away the cigarette ash and scratched his ankle. It's the 435 from Austin, she said. Cool. Who's on board? She cocked her head to the side and thought. Mostly totally forgettable people. A couple of professional musicians, but nobody famous. A singer or two that'll work at somewhere like the Get Back for 10 years and never get the record deal that she deserves. Maybe she'll have a single on Lighting 100 a couple times, but she'll never make it. Kevin nodded his head in quiet agreement. What about that one? He pointed west. She followed his gesture and spotted the banking silver jet. The 2 o'clock from Los Angeles, a whole bunch of people coming to visit all their California friends that moved here last year. Kevin smiled and laughed. No energy crystal or slice of avocado toast is safe from the scourge of the Californians. At first they came for the porch swings, but I was not a porch swing, so I did not speak out, Wren said. He slapped his knee and took a drag from his smoke. Too funny, girl. You think you'd ever move back to California? She wrinkled her chin and fiddled with a large piece of gravel. I couldn't afford it. Well, I could afford Fresno, but I wouldn't go back to Fresno, no. He nodded his head in agreement. They watched cars lazily pass by on Dickerson Pike. The White Castle sign flickered to life as the sunset faded to lavender. The high clouds were swelling up in long rows of purple flow to the north. Do you think you could ever do a solo exhibition? He asked. She bit her lip and shook her head. I don't know. I don't know how you proceed beyond these seasonal things at places like this. I sold some stuff to patrons, but anything that's big and cool you can't sell. You can't sell an installation. You're more likely to sell an experience than something like what I'm doing here. Right, I get it. So when you finish this visual art thing, are you doing something in the summer again, do you think? He asked. She looked up at the sky and sighed. I don't think that far ahead, especially not right now. Things are too crazy. He crushed out the cigarette and took another from the pack. You might not think that far ahead, but what would you want to do if money was no object, time was no object, in a perfect world? What would you do? Wren focused on the tiny hole that she'd been digging with a piece of mulch. If money was not an object, I have a whole set of things I'd do, but aside from fantasy stuff, I have this concept of a thing that responds to music. It's like an arcade game cabinet, but it visualizes music. They'd be all over the place, like a jukebox, but friendlier than that. A little entertainment kiosk. Maybe they'd put them at bus stops for people to fiddle with while they're waiting for the bus, she said. That's really cool. See? You have something right there. Make it happen. Again, Kevin struggled with the lighter. That's a lot of work, though. It was enough work to rig up 2 projectors for this show. She gestured back at Constellation. Kevin lit the smoke and tossed the lighter up in the air and let it fall to the gravel between his knees. If it's a good idea, people will help you out. A wise man once told me that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Kevin mumbled through the filter of the cigarette. She scoffed and rubbed her hands together. Okay, what about that one, the one that just took off? He pointed at another Southwest jet. Wren rolled her eyes. It's bound for Orlando and it's floor to ceiling full of screaming, crying children. Kevin laughed out loud. He hung the cigarette from his lip and tossed pebbles across the mostly empty parking lot. That reminds me of something I was thinking I wanted to say to you. I was mean to you when we were kids, I admit it, and I kind of feel sorry about it. She shook her head. Who cares? Of course you were mean. We were kids. If kids aren't mean to each other, they grow up to be repressed or sad or something. He grabbed her knee. Don't dismiss it. I want to say I'm sorry. I'm reckoning with making you cry and making you have to cut your hair because I put pain in it and whatnot. I'm going to be 30 next month. That's fucking crazy. She nodded her head in agreement. You haven't been a kid for a long time. Are you just now starting to regret things? He shook his head. It doesn't feel that way. I still feel the same. I feel like I should be more responsible, but I'm still excited by everything. I want to see everything. I want to know what everything feels like, good or bad, boring or scary. That's why I liked Felicia. Again, good or bad. He took a smoke and exhaled into the twilight. Kevin recalled the last day that he'd seen Felicia. She'd worked her way up to 5 balloons a day and Kevin had gotten clean. Shortly after the moment that she'd realized that he wasn't going to bump with her, she'd searched his backpack for his gun and forced it into his hands. She found an apple in the glass bowl on the table and put it on her head. Kevin was instructed that he wasn't leaving unless he had the cojones to shoot that motherfucker off there first. What Kevin had to prove to her was beyond him. Her strung-out equations weren't making sense. After some stalling that included forcing her outside onto the balcony, it became clear that she was dead serious that she wanted the apple shot from her head, even if it took multiple shots. She had raced to bar the door with her body when he moved to leave, and at one point pulled the barrel of the gun to her head when Kevin put his hand on the doorknob. He agreed to take a shot on the balcony, and she had relented. He'd lined up the handgun with the apple and told her to hold out her arms. Close your eyes, he'd said. She refused. Kevin's first pull of the trigger resulted in an empty chamber. Felicia didn't flinch. The next trigger pull found an active round. Kevin couldn't tell whether the shot hit the apple or not. It was close. Felicia fell to the ground and played dead until he could shake her enough to wake her up. When he finally left that evening, he found the apple lying in the driveway, dented from its fall, but unharmed by any bullet. The wind picked up and Wren clutched her arms together in a chilled huddle. The clouds had faded to the gray of nightfall. Kevin flicked a cigarette butt into a nearby pothole. The arriving planes were stacked up, one after the other, gradually dimmer stars fading into the southern sky. Okay, one more. That one. Kevin pointed at the blinking lights of an incoming plane. Wren stared at it for a while as it took a slow turn to line up with the runway. It's the 445 from Omaha, and it's 100% bachelorette parties, she smiled. Kevin jumped to his feet. He leaned down to offer Wren a boost. She looked up and reached out for his hand. Chapter 24. Thryothoris ludovicianus is a small passerine songbird native to the eastern United States. Their range extends from southern Quebec to the Yucatan of Mexico. Commonly known as the Carolina Wren, T. ludovicianus is tenacious for its size, an adaptable forager that has developed an affinity for nesting in derelict buildings and idle porch accessories. T. ludovicianus is wary of open spaces and will scold perceived threats with a shrill cheer or taunt, particularly when nesting. Pairs are monogamous, often raising multiple broods per year. Demure in color, both males and females are brown, cream, and white and are typically 4 to 5 inches in length. T. ludovicianus is alarmed by the presence of humans and appears skittish among other bird species. A family of T. ludovicianus has formed a neighborhood of ramshackle nests along the battered eaves of Kimmy's Norfolk apartment building. At dusk, they would hop in jerky stunts on her balcony, bringing in sticks for their nests and dead beetles for their developing young. If the males saw Kimmy, they would beat their tail and chirp assiduously at her, jumping side to side in a fierce display that would continue until Kimmy went outside or sat completely still in full darkness. In moleskin after moleskin, she carefully cataloged their stern routines in winter mist and spring sunlight. They were her clock. The return of the male to the nest was 1.5 minutes later each day in spring and 1.5 minutes earlier in fall. They were fastidious about dusk. Kimmy created a table in notebook number 4 that spanned 7 pages. Male entered porch, August 8th, 7:06 p.m., August 9th, 7:05, August 10th, 7:03, August 11th, 7:02, August 13th, 7 o'clock, August 15th, 6:56, and so on through December 1st, 4:55 p.m. Their role as both creature and mechanism was a powerful grounding influence for Kimmy. A senior at Old Dominion, she had lived in the same apartment since her sophomore year. The growth of lichens and the development of the wren's nests provided a safe telescope to a faraway nature. She spent much of her time not only indoors but outside of reality altogether. The reliable appearance of these pudgy little creatures with their powerful calls and confident flicks of tail was spiritual. They jammed themselves into tiny nests and squeezed their eyes shut to power through night. Every single night they repeated their ritual. They took not an ounce of harassment from weather, predator, or human. After nearly a year of observing the brood that had set up residence on her tiny balcony, she had once again taken a seat at the cheap patio table with her sketchbook. As dusk fell, she heard one of the brood returning. He was in the crepe myrtle below. The others were behind him, calling out from points too distant to register. They were stacked up like arriving flights, landing, calling out, flying closer, calling out, hopping closer, calling out. They were following the senior male, an approaching storm of chirps and scolds. The final bird to return to the nest was the yearling female. All of the other birds had buried themselves into their hollows beneath the soffit. The yearling flew to the balcony ledge and turned to look at Wren. Her glassy avian eyes idled with her rapid pulse. There had to have been at least 10 seconds where they just looked at one another before the yearling female hopped to face Kimmy directly. The porch light was dim with the obstruction of dead bugs collecting in the shade. Kimmy put her sketchbook down on the table. The bird turned its head and stretched its tail. In one forceful scoot, the yearling jumped over to the surface of the cafe table. She beat her tail again and again, but did not chirp. Kimmy sat completely still. She had been drawing the family of wrens, the 7 of them rendered in various states of flight. The yearling hopped over to the sketch pad and tapped at minuscule grains of charcoal dust with her beak. It seemed to examine the angles that Kimmy had drawn. The yearling looked back up at her. Kimmy was free of thought, free of emotion. It was the purest judgment that she'd ever experienced. The yearling vibrated with gentle energy. The stern black bulb of the yearling wren's eye focused on her for second after timeless second, seemingly associating Kimmy with the production of the image below. They were cosmically aligned. In an instant, the bird went from side-eyed inspection to fevered flight. She buzzed up to the corner of the eave and bundled down to nest for the night. The following day, Kimmy had the sketch of the arriving wrens tattooed on her right arm. The image extended from mid-forearm to clavicle, yearling female to scruffy grandfather. She didn't bother filling in details beyond her original sketch. It had already been approved by the only critic that mattered. Chapter 25. Sandbox Experience Salon opened in the Chelsea neighborhood of Norfolk in October of 2013. The storefront occupied 1,800 square feet of low-rise retail in a development that, after years in limbo as a nondescript slab of urban decay, had been attractively remodeled to lie colorfully in the gray shadows of battleships and cargo containers. Occupying the west end of the strip is a terrific Salvadoran pupuseria, and to the east is a quiet beer bar that focuses on curating Belgian novelties alongside Virginia mainstays, and is generally recognized as having one of the best bottle lists on the East Coast. Among the geese and barbed wire fences, the neighborhood proved to be a low-lying creative enclave whose setting and characters would drive the virtual reality concept far beyond the basic escapist fun promised in early promotional materials. Sandbox first existed as a typical VR salon with small headsets and standard interpretations of licensed intellectual property. People would stand around and watch their friends flail about in harrowing situations or chop digital fruit as fast as they could. It's harmless fun. It was and still is a low overhead environment. In the fall of 2014, the owner of Sandbox, Santiago Leonard, known to his friends and coworkers as Leo, attended an electronics trade show in Atlanta during which he underwent a sedated experience offered by the vendor Fourth Coast Productions. He spent nearly an hour in a semi-psychedelic state that moved him to tears with its fidelity. Never out of control, never frightened, He was beyond entertained, beyond relaxed. He dreamed of gorgeous nations with no name, beautiful strangers, and nearly pure manifestations of crystal clear environments. He was changed. He'd caught a bolt of lightning. He dreamt for the hours of no clock, he liked to say. Within minutes of completing the experience, he was drafting a contract for 3 salons worth of equipment. His hands still quivered as he shook the sales agent's hand. Despite Leo's perpetual evangelism for the medium, the sedated experience was slow to catch on at Sandbox. A significant sticking point was the price. $60 an hour wasn't pulling in the high school kids, but the slow sales could also be blamed on a lack of proper content. The sedated experiences were inherently cerebral. The interactive content of the visors couldn't be simply ported out to this new interface. New content had to be specifically designed, and the first attempts from Leo and staff were not well received. At no point did Sandbox truly struggle, but Leo often looked at the empty experience salons and saw a daunting investment in equipment. He often didn't boot the mainframe until someone showed up asking to be sedated. This continued for month after agonizing month. Leo wasn't at the salon when she had first come in. Mike had left him the following voicemail on a weeknight. "Hey Leo, Mike, it's 6:30. I told this girl she should come back when you were here, but she came in asking all kinds of questions about our experiences. The things she wanted to know if we had are they're way out there. Heady POV stuff. I told her to come back tomorrow morning. You coming in? Let me know." The next morning, Leo was face to face with a scrawny, stoic Old Dominion undergraduate with dozens of bizarre suggestions for experiences. Leo sat her down in his office and briefly outlined the complaints that they had received regarding the newer experiences. He clearly recalled the way that she'd looked at the ground and smiled as she listened. She fidgeted nonstop as she explained that sedated experiences were best left to abstractions and free associations. They didn't require a significant investment of storyline and structure. Sedated experiences were emotionally lucid and physically vague. They were like dreams, a series of non-event climaxes and atmospheric euphoria. Discrete modeling elements were only occasionally necessary, and they could be obtained in advance and in bulk by having the user submit to have Sandbox access their social media accounts during model development. As she elaborated, Leo immediately understood how lucrative her concepts may be. Leo offered Kimmy Hitchcock a part-time position that within weeks developed into full-time, then double-time. By Christmas of 2015, her customs were often double-booked weeks in advance. They had to begin a waitlist for new client consultations. This is how a custom consultation proceeded. A receptionist would welcome the client to the huddle room and give them a coffee or tea. Leo would enter and spend a couple of minutes running them through the waivers and other paperwork. If they were fine with all the hoops that they had to jump through, and they acknowledged the cost of the consultation and the experiences, then Kimmy would come in and start taking notes. Leo did most of the questioning. She didn't care to probe the clients. After a month, she designed a flowchart for Leo or Mike to follow in an interview that would allow her to design the experience as the client spoke. She rarely asked the clients for more information. If she needed to do so, she had a subset of non-sequitur either-or questions, including, but not limited to, do you prefer dogs or cats? Give up one of these two for good, bacon or ice cream. Would you rather be shot or stabbed? Replies to these lines of questioning didn't lead to the inclusion or exclusion of individual elements. They were markers of how suggestive a person would be when given certain sorts of stimulus within the simulation space. Did they desire a linear thread or simply a vivid environment? Did they even know what they wanted? This would also give Kimmy an estimate of how much effort was worth putting into the experience. She more effectively attacked the design of custom experiences with a desire earned by the traveler. It was harder to do a good job when she didn't like the person. Designing an experience was a brute force exercise of problem solving. Nearly nothing worked correctly the first time. After a few months of working for Leo, she slept very little and rarely dreamt. If she did sleep, it was exceedingly clear to her what she had dreamed about and why she had done so. She actively denied mystery any conceit. One afternoon at Sandbox, Mike told her that she was stubborn. She wasn't in any position to deny it, but she did so anyhow, if just to play self-aware. Part of that uncompromising nature was manifested in her vociferous preference for her newly preferred pseudonym, Wren, and the tenacious creature it personified. One gloomy Sunday afternoon, Leo asked Wren if she was getting burned out. She was staring at the wall between them and hadn't answered him the first time he'd asked. He grimaced as she dismissed his question and stomped off to the bathroom. The following Tuesday was when the first man died in the experience salon. The guy was in his 60s. He'd been in for more than 20 visits. That barely mattered. There were rumors about what he was spending his time experiencing. To Leo, money was money. As soon as the sedated experiences proved to be deeply profitable, he aggressively poured time and money into protecting his investment. He had spent nearly $40,000 to reinforce their business activities to the fullest extent of current legislation. A new byline was added to the waiver every month, or so it seemed. Leo didn't not care about this man's death. As Wren immediately pointed out, he was overweight and a smoker, and his medical history suggested that he probably should not have been under a sedative experience in the first place. He had elected to have the experience despite the recently tweaked 1,300-word medical affidavit. Leo quickly settled out of court for a measly sum with the dead man's niece. That was that. Leo didn't lose any sleep. At this point, over 200 people a week were having experiences at Sandbox. Leo had netted $200,000 in the first 8 months of 2015. In the last 4 months, he netted just over $1 million. When Doyle was found dead only 2 weeks later, the vibe was decidedly more suspicious. Leo knew by the sound of his voice when Mike had called him. Mike hadn't sounded frightened or shocked. He sounded like he wanted to talk, like he needed to talk. He sounded eerily determined. After the investigators left the salon, Mike and Leo met at a diner in the Neon, and Mike unwound a litany of concerns about Wren's behavior around certain clients. Leo had tapped his fingers on the table while Mike wrestled with the many qualifiers. Yes, they were shitty people. Yes, they had agreed to the waivers. Yes, Wren was talented and honestly the reason that they were all making very good money. Yes, this could be a coincidence. It sure as hell didn't seem like a coincidence. Mike knew the regulars. Wren especially knew the regulars. As their burgers were delivered to the table, Leo and Mike sat and stared at each other in silence. The unsettling truth between them would require a difficult solution. Somebody would have to answer hard questions. People would have to be protected, and for Leo, the name at the top of that list was his own. Chapter 27. I honestly don't know how other people perceive how I feel at any given time. A woman named Elizabeth Dvorak spoke those words at 6:35 p.m. on June 30th, 2013. Wren wrote them down on page 45 of journal number 12 while seated across from her in the corner booth of a touristy seafood diner. The original pen strokes were now apocryphal, sacrosanct, held aside from other notebooks in a handy drawer as if someone would get the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to view them on an impromptu tour of Wren's home. She wrote those words down repeatedly, just like she had done for the alphabet, in hundreds of separate instances in the following years. She's writing them down right now in her studio apartment, the same sentence over and over, by the light of a flexible lamp and a Netflix show on mute. The ballpoint pen is giving out and she's had to scratch circles into the upper right corner of the page to get the ink flowing again. For Wren, the words of Elizabeth Dvorak had developed into both a declaration of independence and a bitter, undesired clarity. They were a throwaway admission of rudderlessness, the softly turning wake of a tiny life in blockbuster times, barely loud enough to register over the clangorous din of the Virginia Beach restaurant in which they were spoken. They were a dissociation of personal image, a divorce from the confidence in others to care or subjectively experience a phenomenon. Wren felt the listing of ghosts floating between she and Elizabeth in the diner. She felt as though Elizabeth's words dissolved immediately into an hour ago, or yesterday, or the impossible beyond of last week. They fled as though actively escaping Wren's presence. Left behind was the glowing muse, the inimitable Elizabeth Dvorak, now restlessly trying to open a pack of oyster crackers. Wren was torn between her desire to exhibit the tender presence necessary to heal Elizabeth's unsettled notions and the big, forbidden elements of the desire itself. The first time Wren tried having a personal experience, she decided to reconstruct this specific diner, Huckabee's Beachside, You'll Be Happy as a Clam, within the simulation space. She crafted the scent of canola oil, crinkle-cut french fries, the squawk of laughing gulls, peeling paint from window frames, the occasional scream of jets overhead, hurricane lamps with soy wax candles burning to nothing on the deck. She tried the experience as herself. She tried it again as Elizabeth. She tried it as the waiter, as the cook, the hostess, the man in the booth across the restaurant, the pilot of the jet soaring high above. She tried herself as someone else. She tried Elizabeth as someone else. She changed the music, the food, the season, the drinks, the placemats, the time of day. This secret experiment, conducted primarily after midnight on weeknights at Sandbox on an incognito login pass, became her thesis for how subjectivity, experience, and perception combine to create reality. She had control groups. She had logbooks. Her findings were a blandly disturbing portrait of social chaos. It was a proof of the intersection of human experience and objective observations. If a tree fell in the forest, they made a sound in Huckabee's Beachside. Wren came to call this intersection the anxious Trinity. A person was at least three things. 1. An objective, existing person outside of external perception. 2. The person that others perceived. And 3. The person they assumed that they were perceived as by others. It was this third in the anxious Trinity that haunted Elizabeth, the fictional, real person. The person that others fleetingly assumed that she was, but more likely the person that they deftly ignored. The person that she could not control being. Wren was haunted by the real, fictional person. The person so full of detail, so real, that they couldn't possibly be known to others. They had to be theorized about, mythologized. It would take multiple lifetimes to discover them fully. Wren mythologized Elizabeth. She was preoccupied with the wavy black hair that fell about Elizabeth's face as she admitted the original benign insecurity. She was obsessed with the dart of her eyes back to her empty plate after she spoke. To Wren, she was staggering, this math-obsessed force of nature, a warm and complicated person with 20/20 vision and blue eyes so light that in a flash they appeared white. She owned waiters, had a terrier, knew Chopin on the piano, and had a tattoo of both an octopus and an alligator. Far away from memories of how they drifted apart, Wren enjoyed their casual ruminations about their golden summer setting. Migrating swifts, swallows, goldfinches, and geese. Daylight savings time and the removal thereof. Sexual politics and the embarrassment of courtship, or types of pie. She imagined them having these conversations in cold winter basements or on fall beaches, and they were immediately rendered false. They had their own specific season. All the poetry that Wren wrote in this period was terrible, unfortunately. At that point, any production of pen to paper was like rubbing two sticks together and expecting flame. It was the exhausting insistence that something was important, anything was important, that she was important. Bullshit, Wren thought. It was just experience. There was no use in writing white dude paragraphs about Descartes or late-stage capitalism or vaporwave music. Nothing mattered. She quietly deactivated all her social media accounts at 11 p.m. on Labor Day, and that seemed to help. For a while thereafter, she considered getting a cat. From that frustrated space, she grew the elements of her virtual masquerade. Elizabeth's tiny introspection was a window into the core animal of the travelers, and her own core animal as a traveler. The anxious Trinity could unify. There was safety in portraying others, for others, among others. It was a powerful distraction. That was the allure of the stage, Wren thought. Sandbox had become her stage. This confidence formed a bastion against the emotional fatigue of her nearly constant work schedule. She would be perceived one way or another. Why should it not be the way in which she preferred? The way in which she felt both safe and powerful. Portraying herself as Elizabeth provided an endless well of energy in a virtual landscape that was often cringeworthy and repetitious. She had slowly become that fictional real person, for hours at a time, days on end, guiding mooks through ephemeral temples and dissociative dreamscapes, wavy-haired and anxiety-free, occasionally with the terrier at her side, eyes icy blue and keen to imperfections.
On the next Detour Hotel.
El Gordo pulled the hammer back and smiled at the loud click. Blue started to shiver as the cold steel dug in further. El Gordo's closely shaved head was steaming. "I killed 2 men in Texas for less disrespectful things," El Gordo said. The gun quietly clattered as it shook in the night air.
Detour Hotel is written, recorded, and produced by me, Aaron Rogge, in rainy Nashville, Tennessee. Additional music by Lee Rosevere, Airglow, and Soft and Furious, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. This work is adapted from a novel of the same name, by the same person, and is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or occurrences is a coincidence. Paperback and Kindle versions of Detour Hotel are available on Amazon. Thanks for listening.